Have you ever imagined a silence so profound that it took over your voice? A silence that is not merely the absence of words, but an unconscious choice of the soul in the face of an indescribable pain. This is the story of Conceição, a woman who experienced the kind of loss that transforms everything, the kind of loss that makes the world lose its color, its sound, its meaning. And in the midst of this emotional storm, something unexpected happened. She simply stopped speaking. Conceição was not a quiet woman. On the contrary, she was one of those people whose presence was felt even before she entered the room. Her voice was melodious, full of stories, laughter, strong opinions, and verbal embraces. She spoke with her eyes, with her hands, with her heart. But all that changed the day he lost the love of his life. It wasn't just any goodbye. It was the kind of goodbye that tears pieces away, that leaves invisible scars and a deafening emptiness. And then, without warning, without explanation, Conceição's words simply vanished. At first, the people around her thought it was shock. Then, they thought it was depression. Some judged her, others felt sorry for her. But Conceição wasn't faking it. She wasn't being dramatic. She had entered a place where words could no longer reach her. A place where silence was the only thing that made sense. Have you ever been through that? Have you ever felt that talking about the pain only makes it more real, more unbearable? For months, Conceição lived in a world apart. She would wake up, go through her routine, but she was absent. Her lips only moved to offer polite smiles, never words. Her family tried everything: therapy, medication, prayers, endless conversations, but nothing seemed to reach her. It was as if she had built a dome around herself, and silence was the only inhabitant of that space. And perhaps, in a way, that was what she needed. Perhaps silence was her way of surviving, of processing the unprocessable. But here's what many people don't understand about grief and silence. They aren't linear. There's no manual that tells you how long you need to heal, or that guarantees you'll go back to being who you were before. Conceição was navigating uncharted waters, without a map, without a compass, and at the bottom of that ocean of pain, something began to move, something small, almost imperceptible, but real. Stay with me until the end, because what happened to Conceição wasn't an instant miracle. It wasn't a magic cure. It was something much more human, much more real. It was a journey of rediscovery, and what you're about to discover might surprise you. Because this story isn't just about loss. It's about rebuilding. It's about finding your voice again, even when you think it's gone forever. Conceição's silence was about to be broken, but not in the way no one expected. Have you ever imagined a silence so profound that it took over your voice? A silence that is not merely the absence of words, but an unconscious choice of the soul in the face of an indescribable pain. This is the story of Conceição, a woman who experienced the kind of loss that transforms everything, the kind of loss that makes the world lose its color, its sound, its meaning. And in the midst of this emotional storm, something unexpected happened. She simply stopped speaking. Conceição was not a quiet woman. On the contrary, she was one of those people whose presence was felt even before she entered the room. Her voice was melodious, full of stories, laughter, strong opinions, and verbal embraces. She spoke with her eyes, with her hands, with her heart. But all that changed the day he lost the love of his life. It wasn't just any goodbye. It was the kind of goodbye that tears pieces away, that leaves invisible scars and a deafening emptiness. And then, without warning, without explanation, Conceição's words simply vanished. At first, the people around her thought it was shock. Then, they thought it was depression. Some judged her, others felt sorry for her. But Conceição wasn't faking it. She wasn't being dramatic. She had entered a place where words could no longer reach her. A place where silence was the only thing that made sense. Have you ever been through that? Have you ever felt that talking about the pain only makes it more real, more unbearable? For months, Conceição lived in a world apart. She would wake up, go through her routine, but she was absent. Her lips only moved to offer polite smiles, never words. Her family tried everything: therapy, medication, prayers, endless conversations, but nothing seemed to reach her. It was as if she had built a dome around herself, and silence was the only inhabitant of that space. And perhaps, in a way, that was what she needed. Perhaps silence was her way of surviving, of processing the unprocessable. But here's what many people don't understand about grief and silence. They aren't linear. There's no manual that tells you how long you need to heal, or that guarantees you'll go back to being who you were before. Conceição was navigating uncharted waters, without a map, without a compass, and at the bottom of that ocean of pain, something began to move, something small, almost imperceptible, but real. Stay with me until the end, because what happened to Conceição wasn't an instant miracle, it wasn't a magic cure. It was something much more human, much more real. It was a journey of rediscovery, and what you're about to discover might surprise you, because this story isn't just about loss, it's about rebuilding. It's about finding your voice again, even when you think it's gone forever. Conceição's silence was about to be broken, but not in the way no one expected. And you know, before we continue, I need to tell you something. If this story is touching you in any way, if you've experienced something similar or know someone who has gone through a similar moment, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. Your words have enormous power, not only for me, but for everyone else who will read and identify with it. We build this community together, one story at a time, one comment at a time. And if you feel that this content makes sense to you, that it brings something of value, click that like button. It may seem like a small gesture, but it's what shows the algorithm that this type of story deserves to be shared, that it deserves to reach more people who need to hear it. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now. Because Conceição's story is just beginning, and there's much more to come. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow. It's what gives me the strength to continue bringing real, moving stories that speak directly to the heart. So count on me, and I'll count on you. Let's go on this journey together. Now, back to Conceição. What happened to her wasn't a rational decision. It wasn't something she planned or could control. It was a visceral reaction, a response of her body and soul to a pain so great it couldn't be put into words. After 60 years of marriage, 60 years of shared stories, shared laughter, comfortable silences, and endless conversations, Conceição's husband passed away. And with him, he took not only his physical presence, but something much deeper, her ability to express herself. 60 years. Think carefully about the weight of that number. 60 years by the side of the same person. 60 years, building a life, raising children, overcoming crises, celebrating victories. 60 years in which each morning began with his gaze, each night ended with his voice. They were a unit, a complete system. And when he was gone, Conceição didn't just lose a companion. She lost her own identity, because during all those decades, she had also defined herself through him. Who was Conceição without that man by her side? That question remained unanswered, and perhaps it was precisely this lack of an answer that led her to silence. In the first few days after the loss, there were still tears, there was silent crying, a lost gaze, a body moving on autopilot. But then, something changed. The tears dried up, but not because the pain had passed. They dried up because Conceição entered a different state of grief, a state where even crying made no sense. She would wake up, look at the empty side of the bed, and simply couldn't find words to describe the emptiness she felt. How do you name the absence of someone who was your other half for 6 decades? The transformation was frightening for those around her. Her daughter tried to talk, to ask simple questions about the day, about the food, about anything, but Conceição just stared, as if she were seeing through people, as if she were on another plane of existence. Her grandchildren, accustomed to their talkative and affectionate grandmother, now found themselves facing a woman who was physically present but completely emotionally absent. It was as if silence had become armor, a protection against a world that demanded a strength from her that she no longer possessed. The emotional impact of this change was devastating not only for Conceição, but for everyone around her, because her silence screamed louder than any words could. It said, "I can't take it anymore. I don't know how to live without him anymore. I have nothing more to say, because everything I had to say was to him. And now that he's not here, what's left? Only emptiness, only the echo of a life that was full and now seemed finished." But here is the hidden truth about profound grief, about the journey Conceição was undertaking. Silence, however frightening it may be, is sometimes necessary. Sometimes the soul needs this empty space to begin to reorganize itself. Conceição wasn't giving up on life. She was, unknowingly, preparing for a transformation. Because deep within that silence, something was being gestated, something that would still take time to be born. But that was there, pulsing slowly, waiting for the right moment. What if silence was just the beginning of a new way of existing? Comment below. Have you ever felt the need to be silent in order to understand yourself? But life has a strange way of pushing us forward, even when we think we no longer have the strength to take another step. It had been months of an empty routine, of days that all seemed the same, of long nights where the silence of the house echoed like a scream. Conceição's family no longer knew what to do. They had tried everything, taking her for walks, introducing her to new hobbies, even suggesting she move closer to her daughter. But nothing seemed to reach her. It was as if she had built an invisible wall, and on the other side of that wall was a woman they no longer recognized. But here's something few people understand about the process of starting over. It doesn't happen when others want it to. It happens when something inside us finally says enough. When the pain becomes so heavy that carrying it becomes harder than trying to let it go. And that's exactly what happened to Conceição. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't a sudden revelation. It was something subtle, almost imperceptible. One morning, she woke up and realized that the silence, which had once been a refuge, was now becoming a prison. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman who was no longer herself. It wasn't the Conceição of before, but it also wasn't the Conceição she wanted to be. It was a faded version, a shadow, and something inside her stirred, a small, weak, but alive spark. It was the desire to feel something beyond pain again. It was the desire to start over, even without knowing how. But how do you start over when the words are gone? How do you express yourself when your own voice seems to have been buried along with the person you loved? Conceição didn't have those answers. She only knew she needed something to help her channel everything that was trapped inside her, something that went beyond verbal language. Because words had become insufficient, she needed a new form of expression, a language her heart could speak even when her mouth couldn't. That's when she began to search. It wasn't a planned search. It wasn't a rational decision. It was an impulse, a visceral need to find something that would reconnect her with the world. She began to observe the things around her differently. The colors, the sounds, the movements. Everything seemed to have gained a new dimension, as if she were rediscovering life through other senses. And in the midst of this journey of rediscovery, something caught her attention, something that seemed simple but that carried a promise of transformation. The impact of this decision to seek a new way to express herself was Conceição's first real step toward healing. Because for the first time in months, she wasn't just existing, she was searching. And searching was already a form of hope. It was a way of saying, I'm still here, and I still want to feel something. Her mindset began to change, slowly but steadily. The silence was still there, but now it was no longer absolute. There were gaps, small openings where the light began to enter. And here's the truth about starting over. It doesn't mean erasing the past or pretending the pain didn't exist. It means finding a way to carry that pain differently. It means discovering that even after the most devastating loss, there's still room for something new. Conceição was about to discover this in the most unexpected way possible. She was about to find a language that didn't need words, but spoke louder than any speech could. What if starting over was simply a matter of finding a new way to express what's inside you? Write this down. When was the last time you sought something new to express yourself? What she found would change not only her life, but the way she understood existence itself. It was an ordinary afternoon, one of those when you leave home without much expectation, just to breathe some different air. Conceição was walking through the streets of the neighborhood, something she had recently started doing again, when her eyes were drawn to a shop window. It wasn't an ordinary store. It was a tattoo studio. The walls were covered with drawings, symbols, stories tattooed on paper before being inked onto skin. And something about those images captivated her. She stopped. She stood there, in front of that door, observing. And then, without thinking much, without planning, without asking anyone's permission, she pushed the door open and went in. Who would have thought that an 80-year-old woman who had never even considered the idea of getting a tattoo would find herself there, in that place where ink not only creates art, but also heals? But that's exactly what happened. And the most surprising thing is that Conceição didn't go there to get a tattoo. She went because something in that space called to her. Perhaps it was the creativity emanating from the walls. Perhaps it was the idea of transforming pain into beauty, of marking the skin with something permanent, something that couldn't be erased. Or perhaps it was simply the impulse to do something completely outside her comfort zone, something the old Conceição would never have done. Inside the studio, she was greeted by a tattoo artist who, upon seeing her, couldn't hide his surprise. After all, it wasn't every day that an 80-year-old woman walked into a tattoo studio. But he was kind and welcoming. He asked if she would like to get a tattoo, and Conceição, still speechless, shook her head negatively. But then, something unexpected happened. The tattoo artist, noticing that she was fascinated by the designs, offered something different. He asked if she would like to learn to draw, not to tattoo other people, but for herself, to explore that form of expression that didn't require words, only lines, colors, and emotion. And that's how Conceição's most unlikely journey began. She started going to the studio, not as a client, but as an apprentice. She would pick up a pencil and paper and start drawing. At first, they were just scribbles, trembling lines, meaningless shapes. But little by little, something began to emerge. Her drawings began to take shape, to tell stories. Stories she couldn't speak, but could illustrate. And each stroke was a release. Each drawing was a way to process the pain, to give vent to what had been trapped inside her for so long. The impact of that decision was profound. For the first time since losing her husband, Conceição was creating something. She was putting energy into something new, something that was solely hers. And that changed everything. Because creating is an act of courage. It's saying to the world, I'm still here. I still have something to offer. And Conceição was rediscovering that truth. She was rediscovering that, even after everything, there was still room for beauty, for art, for transformation. The tattoo artist became, in a way, a silent guide. He didn't pressure her. He didn't ask intrusive questions. He simply offered the space, the materials, and his presence. And that was exactly what Conceição needed. She needed a place where she could be herself, without judgment, without expectations. A place where silence was respected, but where expression was still possible. And in that studio, amidst inks and needles, Conceição began to find her voice again. Not through words, but through images. What if the cure came from a place you never imagined? But what Conceição didn't yet know was that that small step, that seemingly simple decision to enter a tattoo studio, was about to lead her to an even greater transformation. For weeks, she drew. Weeks in which Conceição frequented the studio almost every day, carrying her papers, her pencils, and that silence that now seemed less heavy. She drew flowers, birds, abstract shapes that seemed to represent emotions she couldn't name. And the tattoo artist observed, also in silence, respecting that delicate process of rebirth. Until one day, Conceição arrived with a different drawing. It was simple, but full of meaning. It was an image she had worked on for days, refining every detail, every line. And when she showed it to the tattoo artist, he understood immediately. She no longer wanted just to draw. She wanted to mark her skin. She wanted to transform that drawing into something permanent, something that would be with her forever. Conceição's first tattoo was done one autumn afternoon. She chose her forearm, a place where she could see it whenever she wanted. The design was of a bird in flight, with its wings open, free. But there was something more to that bird. One of its wings was slightly broken, with small cracks that looked like scars, and that was exactly what Conceição wanted to represent. She wanted to show that, even broken, she could still fly. Even with the pain, even with the loss, she still had wings, and those wings, however damaged they were, could still take her to new places. With needle and ink, she created on her skin what her voice could no longer express. Her pain, her story, her resilience. Each prick of the needle was a release. Each drop of ink that penetrated her skin was a way of marking her journey, of making the invisible visible. And the most interesting thing is that throughout the entire process, Conceição felt no fear. She felt no hesitation. On the contrary, she felt she was doing exactly what she needed to do. She was transforming her pain into art. She was using her body as a canvas to tell a story that words could never tell in the same way. The tattoo artist worked carefully, respectfully, knowing that this was more than just a tattoo. It was a ritual. It was a way for Conceição to reconnect with herself, to reclaim her own body, her own destiny. And when he finished, when he wiped away the ink and showed her the final result, something happened. Conceição looked at the design on her arm, and for the first time in months, her lips moved. It wasn't a complete word. It was just a whisper, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. It was the first sound she had made since she had closed herself off in silence, and that sound, however weak, carried immense power. It was the sound of someone returning, of someone finding their voice again, not through words, but through expression. The revelation of that moment was profound, not only for Conceição, but for everyone who witnessed it. Her daughter, who had gone with her to the studio, couldn't hold back her tears. The tattoo artist felt a shiver run down his spine, because everyone there knew they were witnessing something rare, something special. They were witnessing the moment when a woman decided she would no longer be a prisoner of silence, that she would no longer be defined solely by loss, that her story wouldn't end there, in that pain. She would continue, but in a different way, with new marks, new scars, but also with new possibilities. That first tattoo was just the beginning, because Conceição had discovered something powerful. She had discovered that transformation doesn't have to be silent. After that autumn afternoon, something definitively changed within Conceição. The bird tattooed on her forearm wasn't just an image. It was a portal that connected her to a language she didn't know existed. And the more she looked at that tattoo, the more she wanted to continue, to create more, to express more. But this time, she didn't just want to be the canvas. She wanted to be the artist. She wanted to learn to tattoo. And when she communicated this to the tattoo artist through gestures and glances, he didn't hesitate. He saw in her eyes that rare determination, that spark of someone willing to dive headfirst into something new, even at 80 years old. The learning process was slow, but profoundly transformative. Conceição began practicing on fruit, then on synthetic skins. Her hands, which had previously trembled with pain and sadness, now trembled with creative anxiety. Every movement was calculated. Every line was carefully considered. And while the needle traced lines on those training surfaces, Conceição was also drawing the freedom of her silence. She was learning that she didn't need to speak to communicate, that she didn't need words to tell stories, that her art could shout louder than any speech. The connection she developed with tattooing was visceral. It was as if each needle prick was a way of stitching together the broken parts of herself, as if each design was a way of rewriting her narrative. She was no longer just surviving the loss. She was creating something new from it, and that made all the difference, because creation is the opposite of destruction. And Conceição had spent months being destroyed by pain. Now, she was rebuilding herself, line by line, color by color. The tattoo artist became not just a teacher, but a companion on her journey. He understood that it wasn't just about technique. It was about healing. It was about giving Conceição the tools so she could write her own story of a new beginning. And he did this with patience, with respect, celebrating each small progress. When Conceição managed to create her first perfect straight line, he smiled as if he had witnessed a miracle. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. It was the miracle of a woman being reborn through art. Over time, Conceição began tattooing herself. Small marks, personal symbols, important dates. Each tattoo was a statement. It was a way of saying, I am here, I exist, I feel. And the most interesting thing is that, while she was tattooing, while she was concentrating all her attention on that act of creation, something was happening. Words began to form in her mind. Not in her mouth, not yet, but in her mind. They were returning. Slowly, timidly, but they were returning. It was as if the art was unlocking neural pathways that had been closed by pain, as if creativity was opening doors that grief had locked. Conceição's mindset changed completely. She no longer saw herself as a victim of circumstances. She saw herself as a survivor. More than that, she saw herself as an artist. And this change in perspective was fundamental. Because when you see yourself as an artist, you understand that you have the power to create, to transform, to reinvent. And Conceição was doing exactly that. She was reinventing her life, one tattoo at a time. And then came the moment no one expected. The moment when Conceição decided she was ready to take the next step. She didn't stop at the first tattoo, nor the second. Conceição dove headfirst into that world like someone who had finally found her purpose. Each week brought new learning, a new technique, a new challenge. She studied shadows, colors, textures. She spent hours observing the work of other tattoo artists, absorbing every detail like a sponge. And the most impressive thing is that she did all this with a dedication that many young people don't have. Because for Conceição, it wasn't just a hobby, it was her salvation. It was the bridge between who she had been and who she was becoming. With each new tattoo she created, whether on her own skin or on synthetic training skin, a new story was told. And with each story, she felt the voice within, her being freed. It was a gradual process, almost imperceptible in daily life, but profoundly real. The words were returning, but not as they were before. They returned transformed, laden with a wisdom that only deep pain can bring. Conceição was learning that silence had not been a defeat. It had been an incubation, a necessary period for her to be reborn as a truer version of herself. The impact of this continuous learning journey was visible not only in her technical skills, but in her entire outlook on life. Conceição began to smile more. Her eyes, which had once been empty, now shone with curiosity and purpose. She woke up every day with something to do, something to create, something to discover. And that made all the difference. Because what kills is not just the loss itself, but the lack of perspective, the feeling that there is nothing left ahead. And Conceição had regained her perspective. She had regained her reason to get out of bed every morning. It was on an ordinary afternoon, during a practice session at the studio, that the unexpected happened. Conceição was concentrating, tracing delicate lines in a complex mandala design, when suddenly she whispered something. It was low, almost inaudible, but the tattoo artist heard it. He stopped what he was doing and looked at her, and Conceição, realizing she had spoken, stopped too. Her eyes filled with tears, and then, slowly, she spoke again. She said her husband's name, not with sadness, not with despair, but with love, with gratitude, like someone who finally manages to say goodbye the right way. From that day forward, words began to flow more frequently. They weren't long conversations, they weren't elaborate speeches, but they were words, they were sounds. It was communication. And each word that came out of her mouth was a victory. It was proof that art had truly healed something deep within her. That tattooing wasn't just ink on skin, but therapy for the soul. And Conceição became living proof that it's never too late to start over. That transformation can happen at any age, at any time, as long as you have the courage to embrace the new. Write this down. What new skill would you like to learn that could change your life? But Conceição's story was only beginning to take on dimensions she never imagined. That bird tattooed on her forearm became much more than a pretty image. It transformed into a symbol of everything Conceição had been through, everything she had overcome, and everything she was still capable of becoming. Whenever someone asked about that tattoo, Conceição could now answer, with few words still, but with an intensity that needed no further explanation. She said that bird represented her freedom, the freedom to fly again, even with broken wings, the freedom to be who she was, without having to pretend the pain didn't exist. Her first work wasn't just ink on her skin, it was a mark of the courage to start over, and that resonated with everyone who knew her. Conceição's family, who had spent months not knowing how to help her, now saw a completely different woman. It wasn't the Conceição from before the loss, but it also wasn't the woman silenced by silence anymore. It was a new Conceição. A version that carried scars, yes, but also strength. A strength that came from facing the abyss and choosing to return. The impact of that tattoo was so great that other people began to take an interest in her story. Neighbors, acquaintances, even Strangers who saw her at the studio started asking questions, and Conceição, little by little, began sharing her journey. She discovered that by talking about her pain, by transforming it into a narrative, she was also helping other people who were going through similar processes. She unintentionally became an inspiration, living proof that a new beginning is possible, regardless of age, regardless of the magnitude of the loss. The tattoo artist, who had guided her throughout the entire process, watched it all with a mixture of pride and emotion. He knew he was witnessing something rare. It wasn't every day that someone witnessed such a profound transformation, and he began to document the process with Conceição's permission. Photos of the tattoos, records of the designs, short videos where Conceição talked about what each symbol meant to her. And these records began to circulate, first among friends, then on social media, and eventually gained a visibility that no one expected. Conceição's tattoo became a landmark not only for her, but for many other people who identified with her story. People who had also lost someone, people who were also struggling to find their voice again, people who needed that proof that life goes on even after the most devastating losses. And Conceição embraced that role. She understood that her pain, transformed into art, had the power to touch other lives, that her personal journey could be a beacon for those lost in the darkness. A time. Conceição looked at the bird on her arm. She remembered where she had begun. The profound silence, the paralyzing pain, the feeling that she would never again be whole. And then she looked at where she was now, speaking, creating, inspiring. And she understood that overcoming is not about going back to being who you were. It's about allowing yourself to become who you need to be to move forward. What if your greatest pain could become your greatest strength? Comment below. What symbol would represent your fresh start? And it was precisely this unexpected visibility that brought an opportunity into Conceição's life that would change everything again. Her story began to spread in ways no one could have predicted. What started as simple records of a personal journey transformed into something much bigger. People from different places began to get in touch, wanting to meet Conceição, wanting to hear her story directly from her. And the most interesting thing is that many of these people weren't just interested in the tattoo itself. They were interested in the transformation, in the process, in the courage to start over when everything seemed lost. Conceição realized that her experience had created a bridge between her and the world. Silence was no longer a prison, but a platform for her to find her new voice. And this voice, although different from the one she had before, was more authentic. It was a voice tempered by pain, enriched by overcoming, and strengthened by art. She didn't speak as much as before, but when she did, each word had weight, each sentence carried meaning, and people felt it. They felt the truth behind those words. The impact on Conceição's life was profound and multidimensional. She not only learned a new technical skill, she reconnected with herself in a way she had never experienced before. For 60 years, she had been a wife, mother, grandmother. She had been defined in relation to others, and when she lost her husband, she also lost a central part of her identity. But through tattooing, she discovered who Conceição was on her own. She discovered that she was creative, determined, resilient. She discovered that she had stories to tell that were only hers, marks to leave that were only hers. Her routine changed completely. The mornings that were once empty, marked only by her husband's absence, were now full of purpose. She woke up thinking about the designs she wanted to create, the techniques she wanted to perfect, the people she wanted to meet. The tattoo studio became her second home, and the people there became her second family. She had built a new support network, a new community, based not on pity or obligation, but on mutual respect and a shared passion for art. Conceição's relationship with her own history also changed. She no longer tried to forget the pain or pretend the loss hadn't happened. Instead, she integrated that experience into who she was now. Each tattoo she got was a way of honoring the past while embracing the present. It was a way of saying, yes, I suffered, yes, I lost, but I'm still here, and I still have so much to offer. Her mindset had shifted from victim to creator, and this change in perspective was fundamental to her healing. The people around Conceição were also transformed. Her daughter, who had spent months anguished, not knowing how to help her mother, now saw a woman who no longer needed saving, a woman who had saved herself through the courage to try something new. Her grandchildren, who had been afraid to approach their silent grandmother, now ran to hug her, fascinated by the stories she told about her tattoos. Conceição had become living proof that life can surprise you, even when you think you already know everything about it. But there was an even deeper layer to this transformation, something that Conceição was only beginning to understand. When people asked her what the secret was, what the most important lesson she had learned on this journey was, Conceição always paused, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to choose the right words. And then she would say something that took everyone by surprise. She would say that the secret wasn't in overcoming the pain, but in learning to live with it in a different way. That the pain doesn't disappear, but it can be transformed. It can be channeled. It can become fuel for something new. This revelation changed the way many people looked at their own losses and difficulties, because society teaches us that we should overcome, leave behind, move on as if nothing had happened. But Conceição was saying something different. She was saying that you can move on carrying your pain with you, but in a way that doesn't paralyze you, in a way that strengthens you. And that was revolutionary. It was a hidden truth that few people have the courage to admit. The lesson that Conceição shared, whenever she had the opportunity, was simple but powerful. It's never too late to start over. At 80 years old, when most people have already retired, not only from work, but from life, she was beginning a new career, a new passion, a new identity. She was proving that age is just a number, and that as long as you are alive, you have the capacity to reinvent yourself. You have the capacity to learn something new, to give meaning to your pain, to create something beautiful from the ruins. Sometimes, new beginnings come from where we least expect them, and the art of starting over is learning to find new ways to express who we are. Conceição never imagined she would enter a tattoo studio. She never dreamed she would learn to draw, to tattoo, to transform skin into a canvas. But life took her there, and she had the courage to say yes. She had the courage to embrace the unknown, even with fear, even without guarantees. And it was this courage that made all the difference. The impact of Conceição's story transcended her personal life. She became a symbol of hope for people going through difficult times, for widows and widowers who thought life had ended along with their partners, for people who had lost their voice, literally or metaphorically, and didn't know how to find it again, for all those who thought it was too late to change, to grow, to start over. Conceição was proof that it isn't. She used to say that silence had been a gift, even if at the time it seemed like a curse, because it was in silence that she learned to listen to her own soul. It was in the void that she found space for something new to grow, and it was in pain that she discovered her greatest strength. This perspective, this ability to find meaning even in the most devastating experiences, was what made Conceição so special. She didn't deny the pain, but she also didn't let the pain define her. And so, Conceição's story continues to unfold, touching lives, inspiring hearts, and proving that life always has more chapters to write. If you've made it this far, you may have felt something that goes beyond the story itself. Ultimately, these narratives aren't just about the past, they're about what's still alive within us. If this video touched you in any way, please give it a like. It's a simple yet powerful way to say that stories like these still matter. And if you want to continue on this journey of discovery and new beginnings, subscribe to the channel. Here, each new video is an invitation to look at life from a different angle. For those who stayed until the end, write in the comments, "This message was for me." There's a video over here that complements this reflection. Click on it and continue reading. Perhaps the next story will also speak a little about you.